Today, what we're going to cover are several points, and they're kind of very distinct ways that Steve and I have kind of divided them up. And they're progressive. So, in a sense, hopefully they make sense and they build upon each other. So, the first topic is asking the right questions. So, a large part of developing any strategy, even at your companies that you lead at, is asking the right questions first, and then being able to kind of try to solve for them. So, what does it mean to ask the right questions when it comes to looking for a job, looking for a career? And then refining your job search scope. So when we were preparing for this, Steve and I were talking a lot about sometimes the lack of focus is really what prevents us from having a robust job search strategy. And that, in the end, does not allow us to future-proof our plan in that way. So refining your job search scope, delivering your message clearly. So once you have the questions in place, you've defined your scope, then what is the message that you want to convey? And a large part of that has to do your value proposition and personal branding, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. And then networking, obviously a big issue around this topic of job search strategy. We've broken up into two parts. So there's networking with recruiters, which many of you on the call today, part of BlueSteps, is looking forward to connecting with recruiters. So what is it like and what does it mean to network with recruiters? That'll be one section of the conversation today as well. And then networking with executive contacts. So these are people that are either in your personal domain of first, second, or third degree connections, or maybe they're contacts that you meet, that you don't really know. So what is it like to network with them as well? So asking the right questions. So in our client work, a lot of the time that we spend up front is really once we've talked to the client about what it is that the needs are in their particular job situation, is really probing them to ask the right questions before we deep dive into any sort of solutioning, right? So if you've ever been part of a large transformation initiative, which I know many of you have, before you can start solutioning, it's actually trying to figure out what the root cause of some of the issues are and maybe some of the business requirements, right? So if you apply that to yourself in the same way, it's asking yourself a series of very important questions. So for example, number one is what do you want to be known for? Right? And that's a big piece of that personal branding is what do people say about you when you're not in the room, right? Number two is what are you known for today? So what do you want to be known for and what are you known for are two different things. And obviously if there's a gap there, it's figuring out how do you fill that gap such that your future leadership is recognized even when you're not in the room. What do you stand for? Now, this is something that is more pertaining to perhaps the convictions they have about maybe it's a philosophy of leading a company, or how is it that your modus operandi is? What's your normal state of interaction with people, and what is it that you'll in a sense sort of define as a box of success, right? So, what are some non-negotiables there that are important for you and the team in order for success to happen? Number four might be what past experiences have shaped who you are today. And that's a big question for yourself, especially when it comes to what past roles and experiences have you had before that have led you to the leadership role that you play today. And that has a lot of implication because what you decide to do in the future is somewhat shaped by what has been done in the past, right? So the strengths, areas of improvement, areas that you want to make a difference. And that's number five is what makes you different that you want to make the difference and you want to help companies succeed. That's a question that we need to delve into before we talk about what the plan is moving forward. What makes you different? Number six is how have you been successful in the past, right? So obviously the saying is that, past performance is not an indicator of performance success. However, as advisors, many times we really spend a lot of time thinking about what's the key metrics that really matter to you, right? That you're proud of and you've been successful on building on in the past. The idea of it is that when you're developing a strategy going forward, one of the ways that you can develop are looking at areas of development, right? So how is it that you can develop an opportunity or skills or capabilities? But another way of looking at it is success, right? How do you build upon what you've been doing well in the past, even especially areas that you do better, especially areas that you're doing better than anyone else, right? So you're uniquely qualified for those particular capabilities or leadership qualities. Number seven is what kind of problems do you solve, right? So what do you want to be known for as far as solutioning? Number eight, who are your role models? And this is an important part of your personal development because you may have certain aspects of different skill sets that you appreciate from one leader versus another, right? So communications, you might have a role model that says, whenever I think or hear them talk, they really inspire me. And that is matters because that kind of forms how it is that you're going to perform in these areas as you progress forward in your career. How do you demonstrate impact? Obviously, the metrics that matter to you the most, how you want people to view you as far as success goes. What are your areas of expertise? That's the value proposition question, right? Always about what value do you bring that no one else does? What's the transferable value that makes sense in the context of your roles in the future? How recognizable are you? And again, that's a distinct, unique value proposition quality about you as well. And who should know about you? This is a question for networking element is who should know about you is not always about, someone that can make a decision, right? To give you a role or not, or if it's a board nominating committee is not necessarily can they make a decision for you, but more importantly, your network, broadly speaking, might be even your peers, right? So who should know about you sometimes are the peers that make a difference in your life. And then finally, what is your greatest professional achievement? And this is the aspirational question, right? The North Star question that all of us need to contend with at some point in our careers. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Are there any other questions that, you all ask yourself or are important to you when you think about the next role? What kinds of questions do you ask yourself, or maybe you ask others to ask you about to kind of break through that echo chamber that we all live in, right? Drop it in the Q&A below. Would love to hear from you. But we'll keep on moving on. So refining your search scope. Pass that over to Stephen.
Yeah, so one of the big mistakes that people make when it comes to any job search is thinking that the broader the scope, the more opportunities that are going to be available to them. And usually the opposite is true. You run into a lot of difficulties when you have a scope that's too broad. Just like any project or strategic initiative, if the scope is too broad, the initiative is likely to fail. So you want to scope things correctly. Doing that will enable you to put more structure into your job search strategy. It will help you to better articulate to people in your executive network or executive recruiters what you're looking for. You won't get that blank stare with, if you have too broad of a scope and people have no clue how to help you. So really refining that down is important. So think, how can I go deeper and not wider? Get over the thought that it's going to limit your opportunities and start thinking about the fact that there may be less volume of opportunities, but they're all going to be much better fits for who you are and what you want to do. So some of the questions that you can ask, Simeon just went through, but also that, hey, what matters most to me question is important too. What is most important in this next opportunity? And it's going to be a mix of factors: compensation, level or title, size of the organization, industry, different things like that. Maybe work-life balance comes into the equation. So you want to weigh those factors, and that gives you an ideal that you can then try to pursue. And you can even try to find companies that match those factors and try to pursue them in a targeted way. Right. All said, refining that scope down really helps you to take better control over your search.
Gotcha. And what is your counsel to your clients around when is it that you expand your search, right? So obviously going deeper is important, refine the scope, but in essence, if things, for example, are not going the way that they expect, or it's time for them to think a little bit bigger, like what are some of your guidelines and maybe some of the guardrails that help them to do that?
Yes, I usually advise people to have like plan A, plan B, plan C. And A might be aspirational, like I'm going to go for it. I'm going for that CIO role. I'm going for that CEO role. I'm not sure I'm ready yet, but I want to go for it. Plan B might be, okay, what's that next step up for me that might not be the full out aspiration, but it would be a logical step up for me. And then plan C might be more of a lateral type but to an organization that's in a better financial situation, a better fit for you and the culture, whatever.
Right.
So you kind of structure things that way, and you start out early on. Now, there are some practical considerations. So if you're out of work right now, maybe plan C gets initiated in conjunction with plan A and B. If you're in a situation where you're not in a rush, things are stable in your current employment, and you've got time, maybe you just start with plan A and kind of cycle through that, and then initiate plan B maybe 4 or 5 months in, and plan
Hmm.
C a year later. So some of that depends on the current situation and how some of the practical considerations there.
Right. That's great. And I'd love to hear from the audience, you know, what are some of the challenges that you faced as far as focusing the scope of your search? If you've been, if you are currently in a situation or you've been in one before where you've had to look for a new job or a new role, it's not intuitive for us to focus so much on that because we have this idea that shotgun approach might be helpful, right? So, any challenges that you faced in focusing your scope, I'd love to hear from you as well. Drop it in the Q&A. What's interesting to me is when I look at the participation even of this particular webinar, and I think about some of the participation in some of the other ones that we host around how do you write LinkedIn profiles and resumes, the numbers are not as interested in this. And I think that's very telling of the fact that many folks don't understand necessarily that job search is not about documents. It's actually primarily around a strategy that you have to put into place. And, getting the word out there is interesting because those of you on the call now, I think, have a leg up on others who may not understand the importance of a strategy. So I just wanted to kind of give kudos to the audience because it's very, very telling to me as a coach around like how much more education we have to give out, right? So thank you for that, Stephen.
Sure.
Um, so exploring what career options are open to you. So as I mentioned earlier on, some of these key questions that we talked about, I think the 15 of them are very critical to helping you establish grounding yourself, right? Before you go and, go for the treasure hunt, right? So number one is knowing yourself. So some of these are pretty obvious, but we've forgotten them, right, along the way as we've been busy growing as an executive, as I know many of you have, right? So knowing yourself, where do I want to be? What do I want to get out of a job? What I want out of a job? And a lot of this is not so much around the maybe the important metrics to live, for example, financial reward or things like that. That's not what we're really talking about here. It is more existential in the sense of impact, right? Because we do spend, 3/4 of your career probably learning a lot of things and absorbing a lot. At the very least, the last third or last quarter of your career, you want to be impacting. You want to be known for something and really move the boulder somewhere which is important, right? So know yourself is very, very critical before you set out on that journey. And then researching, how do my skills and interests match up, right, to the market that I'm interested in? Are there any gaps, right? And in this day and age where there's a lot of new technology out there, a lot of new skills and capabilities even being invented each and every day, how do your skills and interests match up against that? Do you even know what the new skills, the trends are that you need to read up more on, right? Or is everything that you're hearing just, sort of in passing for what other people say, but not first primary source, right? So researching who you are, the skills and capabilities that you're interested in, what are some of the gaps is critical for establishing that job search strategy. And then decision making, what do I need to achieve my goals? And these are some very basic kind of any planning things, right? It's like what are the tools, what are the decision making criteria, the frameworks that I need to make to achieve my goal? That's important to kind of set into place. The reason for that, at least one, is that it keeps it consistent. Because I've worked with clients before, and Stephen, I'm sure you have as well, which is a bit of a moving target when they're looking at one job, one role, for example, so I won't say job, but they're usually quite senior, right? Is they have these set of criteria that says, well, this one looks very attractive to me because I get to report to the CEO or it's a C-suite role, et cetera. That's very important to me. And they might look at another role and say, well, no, but this is an engineering role. And functionally speaking, that's what I've always wanted to do. Doesn't seem to report to the CEO, but that's okay, right? And it doesn't make sense that way. You've got to have some sort of consistency around how you make decisions. And then the last thing around action is, obviously, what steps do I need to take, right? And do I need help or support? And this is where a lot of the work that I do and you do, Stephen, around helping take action is really around once you know yourself, once you've done some research, once you've made a decision-making kind of framework, of which all of us, we help you do that. But the most important part of it is action. Now what? And so the now what might be, well, let's, spiff up our executive biography because people need to know us better, right? Or it might be networking strategy and finding a better way to pitch yourself so you are marketing yourself correctly, right? So these are some of the ways to explore career options. I just want to go back very quickly. There's a couple of comments over here. So going back earlier on, the first question was, I asked you, what are some of the questions that you ask yourself? Someone says, what inspires you, right? And that's absolutely critical. That's the most existential one, which is, what is it that you aspire to become, right? And sometimes the role model kind of factor plays into there. Who is it from a leadership perspective or business leadership perspective do I admire the most and I want to be more of? Okay, all right. So there's a whole number of other comments there that we'll get to in a second.